Welcome to my channel and my video. I will be discussing my prophecy, the cancel culture wars. Cancel culture, the words that instantly split people down the middle. For some, it's proof that justice is finally catching up with the powerful. For others, it's a warning sign that freedom of speech is under attack. But here's the thing. Cancel culture isn't just a controversy of the present. It has roots that go back further than most people realize, and it's evolving in ways we're only just beginning to see. In fact, I believe we're moving into a new era, what I call the cancel culture wars. And before I lay out my prediction, we need to trace how we got here, from the origins of cancel culture to its controversies, to its rebranding as consequence culture. Cancel culture didn't come out of nowhere. Humans have always had ways of punishing people who broke social norms. In traditional societies, if someone crossed the line, they might be shunned, exiled, or stripped of status. Communities used shame as a form of control long before social media existed. Think of the old phrase, public pillory. Criminals once stood in the town square while the crowd mocked and threw things at them. That was cancellation before the internet. And in the 20th century, we saw versions of it too. Hollywood blacklists during the Red Scare, artists losing careers over moral panics, even politicians ruined by scandals that spread through newspapers and television. So in one sense, cancel culture is not new. What is new is how fast, how loud, and how global it has become. Enter the internet. Social media platforms like Twitter, Tumblr, and later TikTok and Instagram gave everyday people an unprecedented power, the ability to amplify outrage to millions. A joke made at 2 a.m. could go viral by sunrise. A leaked video could destroy a career in hours. And because algorithms reward outrage, the cycle of exposure, judgment, and punishment became faster and more intense than ever before. The word cancel itself started almost as a joke. It was a slang on Black Twitter, used playfully like, "That celebrity's cancelled, I'm done with them." But as social media's influence grew, the word hardened into something much more serious. By the mid-2010s, to be cancelled meant to be cut off, delegitimized, and erased from your audience. It wasn't just unsubscribing, it was social exile. You could see the modern form of cancel culture emerging in events like the Me Too movement, when survivors of sexual assault began calling out powerful men like Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, Bill Cosby. Cancel culture wasn't just about losing fans. It was about bringing down entire careers, with the internet serving as the courtroom and the crowd as judge and jury. For many, this was a necessary reckoning. At last, survivors had a way to hold the powerful accountable. But critics warned that this power could just as easily destroy the innocent as it could bring down the guilty. And that's where cancel culture became one of the most divisive issues of our time. To some it was justice, to others it was mob rule. And the controversies that followed would determine how cancel culture became the cultural flashpoint it is today. By the late 2010s, cancel culture wasn't just an online curiosity. It was everywhere. Politicians, comedians, writers, athletes, and even regular people with a Twitter account could find themselves cancelled. And this raised a burning question. Is this a culture of accountability or a culture of fear? Depending on who you ask, cancel culture is either a victory for justice or a nightmare for free speech. Let's break down both sides. For supporters, cancel culture is about leveling the playing field. For centuries, people in power, whether in Hollywood, politics, or academia, could get away with abuse, prejudice, or harmful behavior with little consequence. Cancel culture in this view finally made them answer to the public. Think about it. Harvey Weinstein wasn't taken down by police or courts at first. It was through media exposure, amplified online, that his power collapsed. Kevin Spacey's career ended not because of one judge's decision, but because public opinion, fueled by the internet, declared him unacceptable. For survivors and marginalized communities, cancel culture became a way to push back against injustice. It wasn't about silencing, it was about accountability. You're free to say what you want, but society is free to respond. But critics paint a very different picture. To them, cancel culture is mob justice, chaotic, disproportionate, and unforgiving. One wrong step, one old post, one unpopular opinion, and you could lose everything. The punishment often feels out of proportion to the crime. Careers are destroyed not through due process, but through viral outrage. Take comedian Kevin Hart. He was chosen to host the Oscars in 2019, but soon old tweets resurfaced, jokes he had made years earlier that were criticized as homophobic. Despite apologizing, the storm didn't stop. Eventually, he stepped down. For critics, this wasn't accountability, it was a witch hunt. They ask, should someone be punished forever for words spoken a decade ago? And it's not just celebrities. Professors have been fired for controversial lectures, workers disciplined for private comments, students expelled for social media posts. Critics argue that cancel culture doesn't just push bad behavior, it creates a climate of fear where everyone censors themselves just to survive. A case study is J.K. Rowling. Few cases illustrate the divide more than J.K. Rowling. Her comments about gender identity drew outrage online. To her critics, Rowling had crossed the line. She was accused of transphobia and called out by fans, fellow authors, and even some of the Harry Potter cast. Boycotts of her work followed. But to her defenders, Rowling wasn't being held accountable. She was being silenced for holding an unpopular opinion. They point out that she wasn't harassing anyone. She was expressing her perspective, and for that she was branded irredeemable. Rowling's case shows how subjective cancel culture can be. To one side, it's justice. To the other, it's censorship. Another case is Dave Chappelle. His Netflix special sparked outrage for jokes about transgender people. Activists protested, calling for Netflix to drop him. But Chappelle wasn't cancelled in the traditional sense. He's still selling out arenas worldwide. Critics of cancel culture point to this and say, see? Cancel culture doesn't work. Supporters respond, that's not the point. It's about calling out harmful speech, whether or not it ruins his career. Again, the same event becomes two stories, depending on the lens you use. What makes cancel culture so volatile is what sociologists call context collapse. A joke from 2010 is judged by 2025 standards. A tweet meant for 100 followers is suddenly blasted to millions. Nuance is stripped away, and what remains is a viral moment of outrage. Supporters say that justice has no expiration date. The harmful words and actions should be called out no matter how long ago. Critics counter that this erases growth, forgiveness, and the possibility of change. And so the debate rages. When is cancel culture fair? And when does it cross into mob rule? All this controversy created a rhetorical tug of war. One side said cancel culture is destroying freedom of speech. The other side said cancel culture is accountability. It's consequence culture. And that shift in language, that recoding of cancel culture into something called consequence culture, would change the debate entirely. As cancel culture became a lightning rod, the phrase itself turned toxic. Critics called it destructive, irrational, and even tyrannical. If you were accused of being part of cancel culture, you were painted as part of a mob. So defenders tried something new. They've recoded the concept. Instead of calling it cancel culture, they started calling it consequence culture. The message was simple. This isn't censorship. This isn't mob justice. This is accountability. If you say something harmful, expect consequences. In this framing, consequence culture doesn't undermine free speech. It reinforces it. Here's the reasoning. Free speech means you can say what you want, but it doesn't mean freedom from criticism, freedom from boycott, or freedom from losing a platform. In other words, you can speak, but society can respond. And if society finds your speech unacceptable, the consequences are fair game. This frame tries to flip the argument. Cancel culture is framed as unjust mob rule. Consequence culture is framed as righteous accountability. Let's take J.K. Rowling again. Her critics say she's not being cancelled, she's facing the consequences of her views. Her defenders respond, no, she's being erased for expressing an opinion. Here's the point. The mechanism is identical. Rowling's words spark outrage. Outrage leads to boycotts, criticisms, and calls for exclusion. Whether you call that cancel culture or consequence culture depends entirely on the frame you adopt. Dave Chappelle's comedy sparked similar divisions. Some said, this isn't canceling, this is consequence culture. He has to take responsibility for his jokes. Others said, if he can't tell jokes without sparking boycotts, that's censorship. Again, the mechanism doesn't change, the label does. Even brands get caught up in this. When Goya Foods CEO praised Donald Trump, calls for boycotts erupted. Supporters framed it as consequence culture. The company faced the consequences of aligning with Trump. Critics framed it as cancel culture, punishing a business for free association. When Bud Light partnered with a trans influencer in 2023, conservatives boycotted the beer. Supporters of the boycott said it was accountability. Critics said it was right-wing cancel culture. Same mechanism, different side, different label. And this is where I want to be very clear. I don't see consequence culture as something new. I see it as a recoding of cancel culture, or reframing. The practice hasn't changed. Someone says or does something. Outrage builds, pressure mounts, sponsors pull out, platforms react, careers collapse or survive in a storm of controversy. What changed was the language. Cancel culture was branded as bad. Consequence culture was branded as good. But the substance, the mechanics of public judgment amplified by social media stayed exactly the same. And to me, the clearest crystallization of this recoding came with the death of Charlie Kirk. The reactions online were brutally polarized. Critics celebrated his death as the ultimate consequence of his ideas. The logic of consequence culture pushed to its extreme. Others were horrified, seeing it as cancel culture gone so far that it erased not just a reputation, but a man's humanity. That moment made it clear. Consequence culture isn't different from cancel culture. It's cancel culture reframed, repackaged, and justified under a new label. And from there the stakes only grew. Because now it wasn't just about individuals being cancelled. It wasn't just about whether cancel culture was justice or mob rule. The real question became, can cancelling itself ever be legitimate? That question, I believe, is what's pushing us into a new phase. And this is where my prediction comes in. I predict the arrival of the cancel culture wars. Or we're here already. We've seen the rise of cancel culture. Callouts, boycotts, public shaming. We've seen the controversies that split society. Accountability for some, mob justice for others. And we've seen the recoding of cancel culture into something called consequence culture. A way to defend the same process under a new positive label. But now I believe we're on the edge of something bigger. A new fashion. A new phase in the culture wars. And I want to put my prediction on the record. I predict we are entering what I call the cancel culture wars. This isn't just cancel culture as we've known it. And it's not just consequence culture as a rebrand. This is the escalation. The moment when canceling itself becomes the battlefield. Here's why. Both sides now use cancellation, and both sides accuse the other of hypocrisy. The left uses canceling through boycotts, online callouts, and institutional pressure. The right uses canceling through book bans, laws, targeting speech, firings, and cultural purges. Each side insists their version is legitimate. Each side insists the other's version is tyranny. That's the mirror. That's the arms race. And that's the war. On the left, you see it in the pushback against celebrities, right, like Rowling and Chappelle, or the boycotts of companies like Goya. These are framed as accountability, consequence culture. On the right, you see it in campaigns against Disney for so-called woke content, in school boards banning books with LGBT themes, in efforts to silence university speakers. These are framed as protecting tradition and morality. Step back and you'll notice the mechanism is the same. Both sides are canceling. Both sides are justifying their own actions while condemning the other. And then came the death of Charlie Kirk, which crystallized this tension. The reactions weren't just about him. They were about the legitimacy of cancel culture itself. Some celebrated it as a consequence. Others condemned it as cancel culture pushed to its darkest extreme. That moment symbolized a shift. Canceling had gone from targeting individuals to becoming a proxy war over ideology, identity, and justice itself. This is why I call it the cancel culture wars. Because the fight is no longer just about who gets cancelled. It's about whether cancelling is legitimate in the first place. It's a meta battle, a war of definitions. Is cancelling accountability? Is cancelling censorship? Can both be true at once? That's the frontier we're walking into. And I believe this will become one of the defining cultural conflicts of the next decade. So where does that leave us? We live in an age where speech is freer than ever and more restricted than ever. Freer because anyone can broadcast their voice to the world. More restricted because the same world can turn on you in an instant. Cancel culture, consequence culture, and now the cancel culture wars. The question isn't just who gets cancelled next. The question is, will these wars tear society further apart, or force us to finally redefine what free speech and accountability mean in the 21st century? One thing is certain: we've entered a new era. Welcome to a new age, the age of the cancel culture wars.